UFC London is right around the corner. As always, we are here to break the fight card down this Saturday in the O2 in London at an earlier time. It's me, Ian O'Neill, and I'm joined by Harry Powell, who will also join me this Saturday for the UFC live watch along, live watch stream, whatever. We haven't really named it yet, Harry. I'm going to leave that responsibility to you. I think we've called it the live stream from previous ones as well. But we will be watching this card from start to finish on the SevereMMA YouTube channel. So if you're watching this and you want to come along and watch the fights with us, ask some questions. You never know, we might have a couple of guests or two that might pop in to share their thoughts on the card. We will be there. We'll be there from the first fight till the very last fight this Saturday. So come on and check that out if you can. But right now, we're going to take a quick look at this card. We're going to steamroll through it. Tom Aspinall, Marcin Tybura is the headliner, Molly McCann in the co-main event, and of course we've got Shauna Bannon making her UFC debut on Saturday night too. Highly anticipated debut. Really looking forward to seeing her in there and in action, and a bunch of other great fights sprinkled across this card as well, Harry. Much better effort. Obviously wouldn't be hard to do after last week's attempt to put together a card. A little bit peel behind the curtains here. We are pre-recording this, so as the time this has happened, we haven't even seen the last UFC card yet, if we're being totally honest. So it could have been an absolute barn burner, Harry, and we could have made ourselves out to be real foolish and belittling it after the fact. But I'd be fairly confident in that. Sir, you're living and breathing in London ahead of this card. Are you looking forward to it? It's not as big of nights as we've had in recent times in London for UK cards. A little bit of despair from the fans about the price of tickets for this event. Some people talking about a little bit of oversaturation in the UK market right now. What's your feelings overall, and how the UK have handled their kind of the UK explosion of talent within the UFC in recent years?
Yes, there's a couple of talking points there, right? The first one is sort of, how do I feel about the card? I mean, there has not been anywhere near the level of promotion that there was for last year's March card. There absolutely hasn't. By this time last year, lads at the gym were coming up and talking to me about it, asking me things, seeing this, seeing that. There was posters everywhere for it, at least a month and a bit in advance. Absolutely everywhere. Fighters were doing media way far out, further out than usual. You could really get a feeling that it was a big event, right? This time, there's no posters on tubes. I haven't had anyone talk to me about it. And it feels as though the UFC are just sort of serving an obligation here. It feels as though the UFC have a ton of European fighters that maybe haven't yet fought this year or haven't fought enough. And obviously the UFC have a quota to fill whereby they have to offer fighters a certain amount of fight per year per their contract. And so how do I feel about it? I think very similar to everyone else, which is not that fantastically interested, to be honest. I mean, obviously I'm interested in some great fights on, but not fantastically excited. There hasn't been the promotion that sort of drags me in. I can't catch a break with covering one of these cards. The last London card I was supposed to cover, I had to work and it all fell apart. And then this time I won't even fucking be in London. I won't be in the UK either. So yeah, maybe next time, right? But in terms of the oversaturation, I think that's an interesting point. Like, I do think that English fans, UK fans, there is an element where, because they only get two, I say only, but they get 2 live events a year. But the other side of that is, if you want to watch a live event, you're staying up until 6 a.m. in the morning. And so only a certain number of people are going to want to try and get to both, right? The 6 a.m. in the morning every couple of weeks, every week, and then the live card. It feels to me, though, and this is just colloquially when I went to the weigh-ins, when I was covering Cage Warriors, whatever, that the crowd that goes to these London cards, at least since the March card, has changed slightly. It feels like the crowd that went to the March crowd were absolutely an MMA crowd. 100% an MMA crowd that were there because they knew the fight card was fantastic, and they showed that the fight card was fantastic with their rapturous sort of atmosphere. What happened then is it became like a big FOMO thing where it exploded. The card was fantastic and everyone talked about it. And then everyone was like, oh, fuck, well, when the UFC's in town, I must go, whether I'm an MMA fan or not. And so the crowd, I think, has diluted drastically. And when the prices go up, your average MMA crowd aren't going to go to that because they know that the quality of the card is not worth the price of admission. But because you have people who want to be able to go on Twitter or go on Instagram and say that they went to UFC London, those cards sell out regardless. And so I think that in terms of what do I feel that the card is going to be, probably a ton of skinny jeans, a ton of high fades, really muscle fit t-shirts, and loads of drunk cunts that haven't got a fucking clue what's going on.
But it is a decent card overall. I mean, you know, I guess the problem is, and I haven't got too much into the ticket pricing whatsoever. It's like it sounds to me like they're kind of still charging this the same as what they would have charged for a pay-per-view event, which would have had a maybe higher caliber of fights on it. But as fight night cards go, this is a pretty good one, and it's steeped with lots of talent and lots of interesting fights on it as well. One last question before we break off into the main event, Harry. And, you know, I've heard maybe a couple of complaints as, yes, they're coming back to the UK, but once more we see another London card. And how do you feel about maybe UFC spreading out maybe to Manchester or to Birmingham, or maybe talks of Scotland, or even a Welsh card perhaps even? Why do you feel the UFC is leaning on this London event? And would you like to see UFC events spread around the UK a little bit better?
So I think the first question is easier to answer, and this is a logistical thing. London is absolutely the easiest place to get in and get out. There are 4 airports in London, 4, right? There are a plethora of public transport. And again, when you're in, you can get in and you can get out quickly. In the same vein, there is an incredibly densely populated amount of people in London. And equally, from Manchester, from Birmingham, from wherever, you can get on a train from Birmingham and be in London in an hour and 10 minutes, right? So it's not like it's difficult to get to. And I think that more the UFC understand in the UK specifically that London carries this name, right? The capital city, one of the epicenters of the financial world. And so when you slap UFC London on it, it just sounds sexier. And so I also think they already have a relationship with the O2. They know how to use that venue. They know how to work with that venue. And so also it's a big venue. You can fit a ton of cunts in there. Now, do I think it would be cool to go and see a Stadium of Light show in Wales, for instance, or at MEN Arena, or the Bull Ring show in Birmingham? Yeah, sure, absolutely. But I also think that it's about who's going to headline, right? Because if you go back to Liverpool, which you could do, the Echo Arena, that would be massive. You've got the Molly. Tom Aspinall is, you know, at this point, sort of an adopted Liverpudlian. And then
what capacity is the Echo Arena? Does it hold 20?
Big. It's like 15,000.
Yeah, and the O2 will hold what, 20,000 plus, was it?
Yeah, 20 plus. I think it's 23.
And that's another major factor too, really, when you're coming to ticket sales, really, you know, revenue that the UFC are creating.
Right. Because there's a massive expenditure for them to bring it over here, right? It's going to be more than an Apex show. It'll be more than a local American show because you're doing international flights. You're doing international flights for some of the fighters on the card. And so there's all of that factored in. Plus, it's just easy. The UFC know they go to London, it sells out. That's just what happens, right? They can't guarantee, and I don't think they're in the business of trying to guarantee that if they go to a Manchester, go to a Birmingham, go to a Wales, go to wherever, Scotland, Ireland, wherever, that they're going to sell it out. Would I like to see it? Yeah, of course. It'd be great. Something interesting, something new, something fresh. Of course. Will it happen? I doubt it.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Just a couple of talking points before we actually get into the main event. And that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to talk about Tom Aspinall and Marcin Tybura. Look, it wasn't a great event for Tom Aspinall the last time he rolled around. It was in around this time last year, if I'm not mistaken, where he went in and took on Curtis Blades, and the fight was over before it even started, Harry. Obviously, an unfortunate incident when Tom Aspinall went and hurt his ACL, was forced out of the fight. he gets a chance to come in and headline once more against Marcin Tybura. And it's a good kind of fight to come back to, I think, for Tom Aspinall. Very, very unfortunate, but I'm glad he's getting this opportunity, and this will help his stardom a little bit as he progresses in the heavyweight division, coming in the main event against Marcin Tybura, and he'll be hoping that it goes a little bit better than it does for him the last time out. And you know what? It wouldn't be too hard, bar another absolute disaster coming in here in the main event.
Yeah, I think it's a great fight. Like, it doesn't feel like, again, this is locally, it doesn't feel like Tom Aspinall's lost a lot of momentum. Doesn't feel like he's lost a lot of traction. To come back from a leg break in a year is incredible. That's a fantastic turnaround to be able to get your surgery, get yourself together, get
the ACL, I thought, no?
Or was it an ACL?
An ACL on his knee, yeah. I thought he went down with a torn ACL.
Interesting.
But whatever.
Yeah, I mean, whatever it was, even an ACL, frankly, that's like a 9 month injury.
Almost worse.
And to then turn around and get into a fight camp, and this is the thing, and this is the big question for me, is does he trust the leg? Right? Does he trust his ability to put weight on it? Does he trust his ability to check kicks with it? Does he trust his ability to throw kicks with it? Does he trust his ability to push off of it? We're going to find out, right? But the reason I like the matchup is Tybura is coming off a really nice 3-piece. He is a guy that's been a stalwart in this division for a long, long time. He is the guy that if you are somewhere near the elite or potentially destined for the elite of the division, like Alexander Volkov, you're going to beat him, right? But if you're not, you're going to lose to him. And Tybura is coming in and he's built like a really steady bit of steam behind him. If he goes and beats Tom Aspinall, he's in an absolutely huge fight next time out. And so I think, again, for Tom Aspinall, it's a nice step backwards. It's a recognizable name that people know. It's a main event headline in London. We all know that if he goes and wins this, well, then maybe it is a Curtis Blades, maybe it is a Cyril Gagné, maybe it is a winner of John Jones and Stipe Miocic. The sky is the limit from here. But if we can just jump very quickly into the sort of where I see this from a technical perspective, Tybura can certainly offer Tom Aspinall something on the feet.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, even to lead you into your analysis of this fight, was that, you know, it's a good winnable fight, but it's not a walkover fight, at least on paper. Okay, Tom Aspinall might go in there and he might prove that it is a walkover, and he has fully recovered and is back to the highest level of his game. But definitely from what we've seen in recent years with Tybura in these last couple of fights, like you said, he's been showing us some good things inside the octagon, and this is like a good tough test for Tom Aspinall coming back off an injury. Please continue.
Yeah, damn right. And like, you could have chucked him in there with a bag of Blagojevinov, right? Like, obviously he just fought Tybura and whatever, but you could do something like that, and Tom Aspinall just absolutely trucks him. You know what I mean? But this, I think, is perfect because it asks legitimate questions of where Tom Aspinall is in his recovery right now. If it was Tybura instead of Blades, I think everyone have unanimously picked Tom Aspinall in that fight, and I think we'd have picked him to run through him like a knife through butter. But when you have such a devastating injury as he did, you have to ask just specific questions about, does your biology, does your body composition still hold up to the trauma? What are we going to see from this? Those injuries can affect the fighter's mental game drastically. And so, as I say, this is a perfect fight for that. And the X's and O's are, if Tom gets it down, I think it's done. I think he lands big damage, and I think he can finish the fight when he wants. His offensive grappling, as we know, with submission threats is fantastic. His ground and pound is fantastic. But the thing that's interesting to me in this one is what we saw against Sergey Spivak. And that was his ability to get inside the kicks, the ability to get inside and land big shots in the pocket. Now, obviously, Tybura and Spivak in the stand-up game are completely different animals, but Tybura is quite a kick-heavy fighter, especially for a man at heavyweight. And so I'd be interested to see, does he still employ that kick game with all of the danger of those kicks getting caught and him getting taken down off them? How does he set those kicks up? Are we going to see more jabs? Are we going to see some more outside footwork? Are we going to see low kicks to begin with? Are we going to see Marcin Tybura try and target that ACL leg and see how Tom Aspinall reacts from that? I think there's lots and lots of interesting parts here. But overall, I think Aspinall has big power He has the ability to switch the lights off of Tybura as and when he lands. And I also think if we get into long, drawn-out grappling situations when Tom Aspinall's on top, Marcin Tybura is going to struggle to find himself at the ends of rounds going back to a stool.
Yeah, for me, it's going to be, I feel Tom is going to want to go in here and get the job done as quickly and as easily as possible. I can't see him I can't see him kind of coming in and wanting to stand and bang and wanting to be eating some leg kicks. Like I said, look at you've been hurt before, I've been hurt before, and you're always a little bit apprehensive. You kind of try and get, some of the doubt and some of that aspiration out of you in training, but there will be that level of worry when, he won't want to eat those leg kicks. He won't want to kind of absorb any damage onto his legs. He wants to go in there, wants to get into the win column. And I would expect him to do so, like you said originally in your analysis, and getting the fight down, dominating, getting the hand raised, and maybe looking to go in there and get the job done another time this year as well. There'll be another opportunity perhaps for him to get in there and fight. Like you mentioned a couple of big names there. Are you looking to try and push him to those big names, or would we look to try and kind of get him to Curtis Blades again, or a similar enough kind of test? I mean, I guess it'd probably be easier to kind of have that discussion when we do discuss about this fight on the Balance Breakdown after having seen him compete. But what would you kind of be thinking when it comes to that in kind of how we want to progress Tom Aspinall's career here after this fight, presuming he goes out there and gets the win?
Yeah, I think it does entirely depend on how he looks. If he goes out and puts Tybura away inside 3 minutes, what else are we going to do? What else are we going to do? What are you going to do?
True.
If it's a really close, contested, whatever, and then he finishes him in the fourth, or if he wins a decision, well, then we say, okay, well, how did that fight look? How did it go? Are we as confident? Do we need to cool the jets a little bit? Are there questions that we still need to ask before we send him to the Cyril Gagné, the Curtis Blades, the whatever? But to your point, if he goes out and gets it done early enough, there is absolutely going to be a placement on a US card somewhere for him. And if not, I mean, the UFC are right for making alternates now, right? Do you chuck in Tom Aspinall as an alternate?
You probably chuck in Sergey Pavlovich if I was to pick out of a hat right now based off what he has, but you never know what may happen. Maybe Pavlovich won't be available. I think in the current market and the current structure of the UFC, it's within every fighter's best interest to always kind of stay ready, because you never know when you're going to get that call, really, do you?
Absolutely agree. And I also think, and this is just me speaking from the outside, I don't know this, maybe this is, locality bias, but I feel like the UFC has far more stock in Tom Aspinall than they do in Sergey Pavlovich.
100%.
Maybe that's because he's not an English speaker. Maybe it's because they just like this type of personality a little bit more. Tom Aspinall will go and do the media and he'll have a laugh and he'll make a joke of himself and he'll do whatever. Pavlovich is very much sort of the old school heavyweight where he comes in and tells you he's going to eat his opponent for breakfast and then goes and does it. And then
he does it. But I mean, like that in its own right, even though whether you speak English or not, I guess UFC will sell that as well. If you're going in there and you're putting guys away like Sergey Pavlovich, I mean, that's something that you can sell kind of to the casual audience as well. But it'll be interesting to see what does happen in the main event and after the aftermath as well. Of course, Tom Aspinall, Marcin Tybura. Molly McCann has been inserted into the co-main event here, Harry, and like we kind of had a brief conversation about this fight. And look, we're both of the opinion that, she's been inserted here. And I think anybody who knows what's going on here, the UFC has inserted her into this fight and to give her every chance of going out there, getting the win, creating the story, and getting the crowd riled up before that main event. And look, based off what we've seen off of Julia Stoliarenko, I think Molly McCann should do it. If she can keep this fight standing, you would imagine that she's going to eat up Stoliarenko on the feet here. And I would fancy Molly McCann big time to get her hand raised here on Saturday night. And I'm sure you're the same as well.
We talk about IQ tests, and this is the biggest IQ test we've seen in a long time. All you do is not get armbarred, and you win the fight. That's it. That's all you do. If Molly McCann takes her down, if she doesn't take her down into a dominant position, just get back up. Tell her to get back up. If Molly McCann drops her and feels that the finish is there, grand, pile in, no problem. If you think there's a sniff that there is a chance that you're fighter isn't finished or isn't really looking to get out of there, just tell the ref, get her back up, and then just finish her on the feet or finish her standing against the fence or whatever it is, because we are looking at a fighter that is built a career off being the hype machine, the beautiful story that is Molly McCann. The problem is that you're going to run into a Tyler Santos and bad things are going to happen. You're going to run into an Erin Blanchfield and bad things are going to happen. Now, of course, you can run into a Hannah Goldie and great things can happen. You can run into a Luana Carolina and fantastic things can happen. But I think if I'm Molly McCann at the ripe old age of 33, this is a fight that I absolutely have to not just go out and win, but go out and look really good in winning. Because that's what the UFC want here. Like you said, you framed this fight absolutely perfectly. The UFC have put her here because there's a ton of UFC talent, a ton of European talent on this main card and on the prelims. But Molly McCann is there because she's going to come out. She's going to raise the English flag above her head. She'll come out to probably some song we all hate. And if she goes out and does the thing, she'll jump on the mic, she'll scream some words into it, and people will love it. And then Tom Aspinall will walk out and do some fighting.
100%. I mean, not too much to break down here as well. Any thoughts on a big jump down in weight class from Julia Stoliarenko, who fought at a catch weight against Chelsea Chandler, who is now fighting at 145? She fought her last fight at a catch weight of 140, did Stoliarenko, making a big jump down to 125. It might play a big effect and have a huge part to play, the big jump down in maybe her being able to maintain her gas tank in this fight, or will we see Molly McCann perhaps go and try and work the body to test that gas tank in this fight? It would be definitely the smart thing to do if you're a McCann in testing Stoliarenko down at 125.
Maybe. I mean, this is Stoliarenko's first fight in almost a year. And so if you decided you were going to make a run at a weight class at 125 or whatever, I mean, you've had essentially 9 months to get there. I wouldn't be too worried about the conditioning necessarily. Obviously, Molly McCann should be working the body regardless of who she's fighting, because that's just what good fighters do. But yeah, sure. I mean, it is what it is, you know? We've gone from 135, we're coming down to 125. We've had a 140 bout. Fine. Let's see.
Yeah, I mean, well, she has fought a lot at featherweight before in the past. I think coming down to bantamweight, like, I mean, 10 pounds can be a lot for some fighters, not for all, but for some fighters. I mean, go out and ask Pitbull, Patricio Pitbull, and how he performed against Sergio Pettis. 10 pounds is a lot. It'll be interesting to see. It's something that I noted for sure, but also what I'm noting is the absolute banger that's going to take place before Molly McCann's fight, and that is the fight between Jai Herbert and Faris Ziam. And this is going to be a striking, beautiful masterclass here, Harry. I'm really excited to see this one go down. Are you?
100%. Faris Ziam, again, I am biased. I almost find I'm saying this every couple of weeks. But when you get a fella that's long and at a lighter weight class and can use it, it can be a cheat code. And Faris Ziam is a guy that's not quite gotten to the full capability of his entire powers with his range, but he certainly knows how to strike. He's silky with it, he's smooth with it, and so's Jai Herbert. I think but Jai Herbert has a big advantage in the pure one-punch power, can absolutely get to a point where you are skating or your lights are turned off, and you can ask Ilia Topuria about that.
Yeah, I think he's just the cleaner of the two strikers, really, Harry, isn't he? And we did see that. Like, I mean, I don't think we can take that performance against Ilia Topuria for granted, although Ilia was up. But I mean, the class still showed from Ilia Topuria, but Jai Herbert almost had him out of there. And the way he sets up his shots is so beautiful. He has a lovely high kick, and almost did the damage against Topuria. And it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, Ziam is coming in here. He'll be kind of a similar enough frame and stature of Jai Herbert in there, but I do feel that the cleaner of both of these strikers is Jai Herbert coming into this fight.
I agree. And Ziam's coming off a big win, right? Lots of confidence. Okay. He fought not so long ago, but man, Sorry,
took out another Cage Warriors alumni in Mikkel Figlak, but we were very surprised to see that after, suffering a pretty kind of dominating defeat to Terence McKinney before that. But like I said, this is, I think, what adds an extra little bit of fire to this fight as well, because Ziam is coming in there after that impressive win, and, he'll have that confidence back. But it'll be up to Jai Herbert to take that confidence away and take it away early. And how you'll do that is you'll insert yourself in the pocket, you'll be confident in your own ability, and you'll get off your hard shots early, and you'll start making Ziam kind of doubt his ability again, because I feel we've seen that a little bit when his back is against the wall. He likes being the hammer, but does he like being the nail? And I think that it's Jai Herbert's it's within his business to come into this fight and insert himself as the hammer in this fight. And I feel if he does that, he's going to be successful.
I agree 100%. I think you've called it perfectly. If Jai Herbert goes out and puts a Jai Herbert fight on, I think he gets it done quick, inside a round. If Fares Ziam is able to dictate the range, is able to keep Jai Herbert away, keep him at the end of his shots, Jai Herbert will take risks to get inside. And if he takes risks, Fares Ziam is a guy that can catch him as he's taking those risks. But I'm heavily favoring Jai Herbert in that fight.
Absolutely, I am too, and I'm really, really looking forward to it. And I mean, the good fights just keep coming on this card. I mean, there can be some complaints about the pricing, but there can be no complaints about the matchmaking on this card, and that is a fact. And Leron Murphy is back in there against Joshua Culibao at 145 pounds, and this is a mouth-watering clash as well. This is just has. I mean, I was going to say this has wildness written all over it, but I'm just worried that Leron Murphy, not worried is the wrong word. I'm curious to see if Leron Murphy will be willing to get himself involved in a wild fight, because he did that the last time and, he almost lost the fight, to be honest. That's the truth. He went in there and had to pick up a really, really hard win against Gabriel Santos, who came in on his debut and caused Murphy all kinds of problems. So it'll be very interesting to kind of see what kind of game plan Murphy comes in here, because when he is on song and when he does fire off, he's also a very, very clean striker inside the octagon.
Yeah, I mean, I think Gabriel Santos has kind of been... he's had some tough matchmaking. Like, he gave David Onama absolutely everything he had, and then he got finished with an uppercut. Grand. He ran Leron Murphy really, really, really close in a very, very close fight. Josh Culibao, I think, is interesting because he's another risk taker. I think Leron Murphy hits really hard, and Josh Culibao is there to be hit. But the question is the grappling for me. Josh Culibao is a big sniper when it comes to submission offense. And to this point in the UFC, how have I forgotten his name? Leron Murphy has not faced like a super sniper. We know that Makwan Amakani has a good DOS, but we've not seen him compete against somebody with just, when he gets hold of you and there is some form of neck or arm available, he's going to try and rip it off. And so I really like this test for that reason. But Culibao is a guy that will come in, his hands will be loose by his sides, and he is ready to come in and fight. And I think Leron Murphy is a style that eats that sort of style up for breakfast, usually. But there were some questions that came out after that Santos performance. Was it, it's a tough notice, short notice opponent, and he was pulled from pillar to post in all of those, those weeks that Nathaniel Wood fell out of that fight?
There was a lot of uncertainty there because you had spoke to Leron ahead of that last fight as well. And, there was times, and I think even when you spoke with him, he hadn't even an opponent confirmed either. So I don't think it's the best preparation, wondering even if you're going to be fighting or not. Obviously, with the pullout of Natalia and Wood was unfortunate, but they eventually got somebody in there. And, I think the onus that he can take out of that fight, yes, it wasn't his best performance, but he still got the win. He's still undefeated. And, he'll bring that into this fight, but he won't be afraid. He won't be afraid to kind of turn it on Culibao, but he's also going to have to be very, very careful as well that he doesn't get drawn into another kind of a scrappy war, which could result in a decision that could go either way. And I'm wondering if he's going to come in here with the chip on his shoulder to try and push and get a finish in this fight, because I think this is what he needs. I think what he's been missing in his last couple of fights is that devastating finish, which we know he does have. He has big power, does Leron Murphy. But, Culibao is not going to be an easy guy to get out of there.
I completely agree with you again. I have a feeling Lerone Murphy comes out here and from moment one is going to be trying to sit down on his punches and really make Culibao question whether he wants to come forward, whether he wants to be in there. And I think Lerone Murphy is going to be looking to get a very, very vicious finish.
Indeed, he will. Speaking of vicious finishers, we move on to Nathaniel Wood and Andre Fili. And I mean, the good fights keep it coming here, Harry. They're keeping us on our toes here. And this isn't like, I mean, I think I've heard it, and I would always testament to it, and I haven't said it in a long time, but I think McMaynard and Sean Shelby do a fantastic job on matchmaking. I think it's been on show so far again this year, and they've always been consistent in how good competitive matchups should look like. And they've done it again for this card. Nathaniel Wood versus Andre Fili. Wood up at 145. Fantastic matchup. A really good test for Nathaniel Wood. And the big question here, Carrie, coming in, as always, is which Andre Fili is going to come up, because there definitely is two versions of Andre Fili that we have seen. A guy who comes in there with the bit between his teeth and could be a problem for anybody, or a guy who's just not mentally there and has not been mentally there sometimes inside the octagon, who can be put out of there relatively easy. And I think, you know, the cards are laid down in Nathaniel's Woods' hands to kind of go out there and put the pressure on, similar enough to what we've said with Jai Herbert and Faris Ziam. Your thoughts on this fight, please?
I'm going to call it now. I think this is fight of the night.
Ooh.
And the reason I think this is fight of the night is because I can only assume that Andre Fili, coming off a close split decision win to Bill Algeo, and we saw in between rounds that we had Andre Fili that turned up and was focused, and we had Andre Fili that was less focused. I feel like Nathaniel Wood's style is one that Andre Fili is going to feel like he can match up with really, really well. But in actuality, I think is going to be a problem, because Nathaniel has that really, really light on his feet, in and out, really solid jab, sits down on his shots, is happy to be in the pocket, leads with some really vicious low kicks, works the body really well. Andre Fili is similar, but longer, but is more hesitant to bounce in and out, and he's going to go in, and then he's going to go back out again. And so I feel Nathaniel Wood is going to read the timing quite well of Andre Fili. The grappling, I think, is interesting here, because we have seen Fili have some really, really fantastic grappling performances. But if we go back all the way to Nathaniel Wood's debut, when he caught a submission against the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt from a Bravo choke, it's not like he can't wrestle himself. It's not like he doesn't have front headlock attacks. And I know a couple of guys that train in Nathaniel Wood's gym, and a lot of them speak very highly about the ability not to not take him down, but it's more to not get caught in submissions. And he uses them very, very well to get himself back up and back into standing positions, or at least dominant wrestling positions. And so I feel like I do have a sneaky feeling that this is the UFC trying to set both guys, both Lerone Murphy and Nathaniel Wood, up with a win here, so that they can come in and they can fight each other, because obviously that was the talk at the time, and there's been lots of back and forth since then. And so I wonder whether the fight night card that might come March next year, if they want to wait that long, or otherwise, would be a co-main event between those two guys. But
it'd be a great fight to have on a Dublin card next year. Let's get out of London for a show or two. Let's bring the UFC back to Dublin. But just to kind of pinpoint what you said about Nathaniel Wood and how good his wrestling is, and his takedown defense, and his ability to be defensive as well with his grappling. I don't think he's going to play that game all too much with Andre Fili. I feel that Fili is wild on the feet, and I feel that Nathaniel Wood might be able to find a fefew gaps, get off a couple of strong shots. I'm really sensing a Nathaniel Wood finish in this fight. I feel he's going to keep the fight on the feet. I feel that he's going to land the cleaner strikes, and I feel that he's slowly going to wear down on Andre Fili. And that's how I can kind of see the landscape of this fight going down.
Agreed.
100%. We shall move on to the last fight on the main card, and that is Andre Muniz versus Paul Craig. I thought this is an interesting fight. Obviously, we have Paul Craig moving down to the middleweight division. You're not so sold on this fight. You believe it's going to be a relatively easy fight for Andre Muniz. Please share your thoughts on maybe the decision of Paul Craig at this stage in his career to make the move down to the middleweight division.
I mean, I fucking hate it, to be honest. And I
Yeah,
hate it mostly because fuck weight cutting, right? But I just... My problem with Paul Craig at light heavyweight was that he's built a style that when it works, it works. And that's, you don't do a ton on the feet and you wait until you find yourself playing guard, and then you're looking for triangles, you're looking for arm bars, and you're looking for sweeps to get back on top, and then land ground and pound, right? Or look for submissions from top two. Fine. The problem is that in modern MMA, that doesn't work. And in modern MMA, that leaves you with a lot of concussion and a lot of head trauma. And he said himself in previous interviews that he will happily let a guy think he is almost knocked out so that they will come down, follow him to the mat, and try and do the things. That's not a good style plan, right? It just really isn't. And if your chin is suspect and you're getting pieced up by Shogun Rua at light heavyweight, I don't think the answer is to cut a ton of more weight to get down to middleweight. I just don't think that's the answer whatsoever.
No. I mean, you mentioned the prime example of Dan Hooker at UFC 290, a guy who got dropped and clipped by Arnold Allen, but ate a head kick from Jalen Turner that, God almighty, I don't know how he took that. And, even we mentioned it about that 10 pounds. I mean, that 10 pounds can prove very, very vital in the health and the well-being of a fighter. When you are cutting it down, you're draining your body, you're training your brain, and you're just not as durable sometimes when you move down. But I
20
mean,
pounds, right? 20 pounds.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Excuse me. I was meant to on what we were talking earlier on. Of course, this is a more drastic cut, but do you think Muniz is going to punish him on the feet based off what we've seen in recent fights? Because I wouldn't be so confident in that. I mean, this is going to be very, very interesting if it does hit the mat. You'd be like, obviously, being engrossed in grappling. Who would you fancy to get better of the grappling exchanges if this was to hit the mat?
MMA grappling, Andre Muniz. I really think so. I just think the style that beats Andre Muniz is big hitters on the feet and big explosive hitters on the feet. Well, Paul Craig is neither of those things. Do I think he carries a bit of power? 110%, right? He's a big fella. I'm sure if he hits you, it hurts. But I have a feeling Andre Muniz is going to try and keep this on the feet for as long as he can. And I think he is going to try to just put fists on Paul Craig. Now, if he can take him down into dominant positions like a side control, then fine, no problem, do so. I would be very wary of landing in a Paul Craig close guard. I'd be very wary of landing in a Paul Craig half guard, or at least settling in there. Right? If he lands in there and he wants to immediately pass and could do so, fine, no problem. But we know that there are a deep plethora of attacks that Paul Craig has from both close guard and from half guard. But I just get the sense that Muniz is the better athlete. He's the more explosive athlete. Now, he's not an explosive athlete by any stretch of the imagination. Just in comparison to Paul Craig, I think he's the more explosive athlete. And we saw... The one for me was the Jacare fight, right? Because what we saw against Jacare was a guy that, again, is at the end of his tenure of explosivity, but he absolutely knows what's happening in the jiu-jitsu situations. Absolutely knows. And yet he gets his arm almost snapped in half, right? So I feel like the constrictive nature of an Andre Muniz is a tough style matchup against Paul Craig's jiu-jitsu, who wants space. He wants you to throw shots because that allows him space to bring his legs in for frames, to look for triangles and look for arm bars. I think if Andre Muniz and Paul Craig hit the mat and it's in anywhere near like a non-scrambly position, if he just hits a double leg, sits him to the mat, and then they're in jiu-jitsu positions, I just don't think Paul Craig wins that fight.
Yeah, I would lean a little bit towards Andre Muniz in that fight. Interesting to see how Craig looks. Interesting to see how Muniz looks after that loss to Brendan Allen in his last fight. And I'm also interested, Harry, in Mick Parkin, who you kind of spoke about a little bit as well. Coming in here, he had visited your gym in London Grapple, and you said that he was an almighty size. He's coming into this fight with Jamal Pouges undefeated at 6-0, having won on the Contender Series. But in reality, he fought a lot of cans before that Contender Series fight, but went out there, got the rear naked choke. He's 6-0 with 6 finishes. You said that he's a big fella. Tell us a little bit more. What do you know about Mick Parkin? Or maybe you could tell us something that we don't know about this gentleman and the heavyweight division this fight is too also.
So he trains with Andrew Fisher. If I wasn't on mute, you'd be able to hear me. He trains with Andrew Fisher, who had a couple of fights in Bellator up in the north of England. He is a longtime training partner of Tommy Aspinall. And so I think that's one of the reasons why they're sharing the card together, right? Well, he did come to London Grapple. He did come to an open mat, and he was a fucking gigantic human. We went to the train station together afterwards, and I was asking him, like, how's the things? Like, he was struggling to get fights or whatever. And he said, there's an off chance I might be getting into Dana White Contender Series. And I said, oh, no way. Congratulations. Like, that'd be super cool. And then, here he is on Dana White Contender Series, picking up a win. Fair play to him. When he was grappling, it's hard because he's so big in comparison to almost all the other guys at the gym that it's hard to really get a sense of his capability. And especially when you're rolling with MMA guys, a lot of the time when they go to a grappling gym, what they're really looking for is to try to test their ability to stay on top against grapplers who are super confident playing on the bottom. He was maybe 120 kilos. And so it's hard to move him as it stands. So I didn't get to see anything that I can tell you about his grappling per se, specifically not when strikes are involved. But Jamal Pouges is a really interesting styles matchup for me because he is a guy that can do a bit of the fighting. We saw against Josh Parisian, there was a ton of grappling in that one.
Yeah.
It would have been good to have seen one of them or both of them do a better job with pinning. But Jamal Pouges did a really good job of taking Josh Parisian down and then finding ways to get him back down in transitions. And so I was impressed with that aspect of it. But Mick Parkin, from what I know, can do a little bit of everything. Can he do it against good competition? We're going to find out because I completely agree that he hasn't been fighting the best of competition up until this point. But Jamal Pouges is a guy that has every opportunity to cause them some problems here.
Absolutely, yeah. Very interesting to see. Look, he's in the mix right now. He'll be interesting to see how Mick Parkin does. He's fighting competition. You kind of highlighted that it is a struggle to find heavyweight competition on the regional scene in the UK, in Ireland, and in general in mixed martial arts. I feel even over here in Canada, I've heard some heavyweights who have been really finding it difficult to find competition. But he ain't going to be too short of competition inside the UFC, Harry. And nor is your boy Davy Grant, who's fighting next. I mean, you love this man with all your heart, don't you? And what a performance he gave us the last time as well, when he went in there and absolutely pulled it out of the fire against Rafael Assunção at the last London event. That was a fight for the ages, and you're getting entertainment when Davy Grant is inside and the cage door closes.
Just one day, when Davy Grant eventually decides to retire and hang things up, I'd love to see almost like a docuseries about him just as a human, about the thought processes, the willingness to endure punishment, the willingness to never quit, and how that came about, how that manifests itself in his life more generally. Because that motherfucker just doesn't know how to lose. Like, he doesn't know how to quit. He doesn't know how to be beaten. Obviously, he knows how to lose. He's lost, multiple times in his career, but he doesn't know how to be beaten, really. And I think this is they are feeding him to the wolves over and over and over again. And Davy Grant says, oh, sure, lads, no problem. You chuck me a name, and it doesn't matter who they are or how many finishes they've got on their record. I'll just go in, and I'm going to fire firework-like kicks at people. Because when you hear a Davy Grant kick land, even through the microphone of the octagon, you're like, oh, fuck, I don't want any of those. Like, but Daniel...
And his opponent this time, Daniel Marquez, 14-0, coming in with 8 knockout wins, undefeated so far in his career, 30 years of age. I mean, it's another one again. And I mean, you said that Davy Grant always gets thrown into the fire, but I believe he's a coal that will burn in that fire, and he'll stay burning and he'll stay burning. And sometimes he burns out, sometimes he keeps it lit. And he's going to have it all to deal with again when he fights a guy like Daniel Marcos as well. And I mean, this can only be an exciting fight because Davy Grant is in it, in my opinion. What kind of problems do you see Daniel Marcos maybe giving Davy Grant coming in here, obviously off a good win against Simon Oliveira in his last fight?
All of them.
Yes.
Like, I completely agree with you that this is the style of matchup for Daniel Marcos where we're going to learn a lot about who he is as a human, right? We're going to learn a lot about whether he has an ability to be tested mentally, right? Because Davy is not going to go out without a fight. Now, do I think Daniel Marcos can finish this fight? Maybe, right? He certainly carries vicious intentions with his shots. The knees to the body that finished his last fight were absolutely disgusting. But Davy is one of those guys, and it's a real shame, actually, because you get to where Davy Grant is in his career, right? And he's 37 years of age, but he's 37 years of age where he's now at a point where he kind of knows who he is as a fighter, and he's kind of it's that horrendous. It's that horrendous sort of trajectory of the bell curve where you're in one side, your skills and your experience are rising, but your body's ability and your age is decreasing all the time.
But he seems to be having such a good time in there as well. Like, he loves and cherishes these challenges. And, you know, he laughing and joking after the fight the last time. You could see the joy when he did pull it out with the fire as well. And it's like, you know, being comfortable with knowing and understanding and recognizing the fighter that you are. And look, at Davy Grant is not going to ever go on at his age on a big title run, or probably even break the top 15 right now in the division. But I'm sure he cherishes calling himself a UFC fighter. He cherishes being on these UK cards and challenging himself against these undefeated guys who are coming in to try and make a name off his name as well. And I mean, you know, he's a champion in his own world, Harry, I think, you know, and he deserves to feel that way as well.
Absolutely. Like, if there was, he's not going to make the UFC Hall of Fame, right? But if there was a European / UK MMA Hall of Fame, he'd be immediately in it after the end of his career, because what he's been as a trailblazer, like the names like Brad Pickett and these kind of like Bisping, these kind of guys that came before. And obviously David Grant's still around, sure. But these type of names they're a different breed of MMA. They're a breed of MMA that doesn't really exist anymore. They're a type of MMA fighter who did it before it was cool, did it before there was an ability to make money from it. And he just did it because he loves it. And like you've said, you can see that when he fights. It is obvious that he does this because he loves it, not because he thinks he's going to make 50 grand in a performance of the night. He probably will, but
yeah,
he doesn't do it because of that. He does it because he loves it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Speaking of love, I love this next fight that we're going to talk about, and that is Marc Diakiese versus Joel Alvarez. This is just a bona fide barn burner. I mean, a very interesting stylistic matchup between the two. Obviously, we've seen Diakiese go in there and flirt with his newfound wrestling skills, if you're to go off the opinion of DC. Obviously, we knew he could wrestle. We've seen him go in there and strike. I think with Diakiese, it's about finding that fine balance between, you know, integrating his striking and his wrestling. And he's going to have to do that against a guy like Joel Alvarez, because Joel Alvarez is dangerous with his power on the feet. He's very dangerous on the mat. And he's coming in there rejuvenated. We'd not seen him since that loss against Arman Saryukin. And it was a bad loss. It was a dominating loss. But you would have to think that Joel Alvarez would have gained many, many lessons off of that loss coming in here against Diakiese. This is a real interesting fight, isn't it?
It really, really is an interesting fight. Both 30 years of age, both in a position where, and this might sound strange, but let me just go with it. Like both really need a good win, right? Like a good win, and each other is a good win. Marc Diakiese's coming in, and we're looking at a fighter who carries so much name value, so much hype behind him. The Michael Johnson fight was such a strange performance, right? Looked like he was just never really sticking to the game plan that he's been put before him by his coaches. But the thing that's interesting to me about Marc Diakiese is I have very fortunately like a rare insight to his camp. I know the grappling coach that he goes to set sort of the grappling sides of his game plan. And I know that grappling coach has some really innovative ways of thinking about grappling from an MMA perspective. And so I'm really interested to see what type of fight we go in against Joel Alvarez, what the coaches and Mark have put their heads together and defined, both from a defensive perspective, but also from an offensive perspective in the grappling, mostly to try and shut down the game of Joel Alvarez, who, as you rightly say, is very dangerous on the feet. And whether Diakiese can mix the athleticism of his just general physique with a more calm style of striking, which allows him to not get clipped and not get finished.
The mix is the big word for me there that you've said, Harry. You've got to mix it up here, and you've got to keep Joel Alvarez guessing here. You can't lull himself, like Diakiese can't lull himself into just an easy tit for tat striking battle here, because, you know, you could get picked off. You cannot just rush in and kind of shoot for naked takedowns either, because we've seen Joel Alvarez, who has a very dangerous guard and is very opportunistic with his submission game as well. So it's kind of keeping Alvarez guessing here for Diakiese. And I think, you know, the same might go for Joel Alvarez, but I feel Alvarez is the type of guy who kind of beats off the drum of his opponent. Like I said, very opportunistic fighter, is happy to stand and bang if they want to stand and bang, is happy to go to the ground, feels comfortable off his back, and obviously has a big confidence in his overall game as well. Very, very interested. Who would you be leaning towards in this fight? I really don't know. This is such a hard fight to kind of pick who's going to get their hand raised. It might be just whoever is the better on the night, whoever comes in here with the best game plan might be the guy who gets their hand raised here. What's your thoughts?
I have absolutely no idea. As soon as this fight was announced, I have gone back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And I think, as usual, we kind of think the same things about this stuff, is that this is going to be just who turns up on the night, whose camp went better, whose weight cut went better, who's just in a better place for this fight on the night.
Absolutely. One more fight. We'll brush through the rest of the prelims. I mean, no guessing what's the last fight that I want to concentrate on before we do run through the rest of the prelims. And that is the debut of Shauna Bannon, someone who I've spoken to since the start of her professional career, even through her amateur career. We've seen her career kind of blossom relatively quickly at 5-0 coming into the UFC. Now is her time to shine. It's great to see some more Irish athletes in the UFC. I'm very happy for Shauna. You know, after what she's been through in recent years, and you know, battling through being pregnant, becoming a mother, balancing all of that with being a professional fighter at the same time. But you know, all the hard work, all the dedication, and she's been inserted in combat sports since she was 3 years of age. Now is her chance to show that she can do it on the big stage. And, you know, she's coming in here against Bruna Brasil, the most difficult task of her career so far. But I do think humbly that she does have the skills. She does have the mentality to get her hands raised in this fight if she fights the correct fight against someone like Bruna Brasil, who has been tried and tested in the UFC a couple of times at this stage, who is coming off a loss from Denise Gomez, who we seen get a mighty impressive win at UFC 290. So, I mean, all of the ingredients mixed up into one here, Harry, makes this a very, very intriguing fight. And what's your feelings about the debut of Shauna Bannon and how this fight may go?
Yeah, a lot of excitement, mostly because it's a fresh name in the division. It's somebody that's carrying a good amount of hype. It's somebody that has worked significantly hard, just like every other fighter, frankly, but has worked significantly hard to get the opportunity to be in this position. I personally, I have a feeling it might be a little bit too soon, because the gulf in class between who she's fighting now and then as she rises up the division is quite stark. And if I'm Shauna Bannon, I want to be incrementally pushed, but because of the stardom that she's built locally and in the European scene, it's going to be really difficult to handle that, right?
Yeah.
She walks really well. She's very, very savvy when it comes to social media and her general media duties. She knows how to sell a fight and she knows how to perform. She's a really, really interesting personality just generally as a human. And so the fighting, not that it's taken a back step, as you say, she's been in martial arts since she was 3 years old, but melding the style that she had from Taekwondo to come into that MMA sphere takes a lot of work, right? We've seen it with the Shelley brothers and Team KF. They are starting to bring that stuff together really well.
Shauna's style was more of a kind of a kickboxing, kind of point fighting kickboxing. She did transform into Taekwondo a little bit, but you know, you can see that in her style of fighting anyway, a very kick heavy kind of style. And you know, we've seen her land those high kicks. I'm sure she's going to be looking for that in this fight as well. Definitely understand and agree with what you're saying, is that the build of her status as a fighter, I feel, is going to have to be handled very carefully in the next year or two with Shauna. But I think the main thing and the main focus point in here is that we can't even talk about the future if she doesn't go in here and get the job done against Bruna Brasil on Saturday night. When you're looking at Bruna Brasil, what kind of holes in her game can you see that Shauna might be able to take advantage of? If I may, for just a quick second, share my thoughts. I feel on the feet, Shauna is a bit more polished, and she's not going to leave herself as open as previous opponents that Bruna Brasil has faced. But I feel the real big gap here is that Bruna Brasil moves backwards in straight lines, which can leave her open to shots. I feel that if Shauna inserts a pressure game here, which she does ever so well, and we've seen in previous fights, obviously she's going to have to do it a lot more carefully and a lot more controlled in her UFC debut. There's going to be a lot of emotions for her coming into this fight. But I feel if she can close the distance and she can kind of initiate into that clinch, even though she brings in a vast striking experience into the octagon, it's her work in the grappling and her work with Paddy Houlihan that has shown in her most recent fights. And I feel that that aspect of her game is going to be so crucial in her getting the win on Saturday night against Bruna Brasil, because you're going to have to be careful on the feet. You're going to have to be careful closing the distance. But I feel if she gets Bruna Brasil past that threshold and gets her up against the cage, the body lock inside trip takedown is going to be there for Shauna. We've seen her land it before. And I do feel if the fight hits the mat that she will be, obviously, like I said, the team here is just being a lot more careful and composed in these situations that she has been before. I feel she will get to be dominating in the grappling department as well. And look, there's no better man than yourself to kind of analyze both of these women and break it down and see how you're going to find this fight and how it plays out. I'm interested to hear.
I don't even think it gets to the grappling.
You reckon?
I don't think so. My big read was similar to yours about moving in straight lines. It's not just moving in straight lines. It's that she doesn't change her angles dependent on what the fighter in front of her is doing.
Yes, and she'll circle into one of Shauna's high kicks, I feel.
You've nailed it. So I think Shauna will circle the cage, circle the cage, circle the cage, cut the cage off, and she'll start by just beating the legs. Just beat the legs, beat the legs, beat the legs. So then Bruna Brasil has to question, how much does she want to move backwards? How much does she want to circle? I think Shauna's style, specifically in the stance that she chooses to go with, it's hard to get clean shots on her head, right? It's going to cause Bruna Brasil to have to enter the pocket. That's not going to happen because Shauna's going to be able to start to use those kicks, use the high kicks, threaten the side kick, threaten the body kick, threaten spinning hook kicks, threaten straight shots that will cause Bruna Brasil to be defensively aware of the dangers of the pocket. And so that allows Shauna to set the pace going forward. If that's the case, it's a rough night. I genuinely don't think the grappling is obviously there. It's an option. I just don't think Shauna's going to need it. I think in this performance, we're going to see the fluidity and the diversity of the Shauna Bannon striking game.
Absolutely. Very, very excited to see that. Obviously, we'll talk about that in more detail when we do kind of do the live watch as well ahead of this fight. Obviously, we're talking about it a bit sooner than it actually is happening on the card. It is the second to last fight, I believe, but that may change. But you keep an eye on all of our social medias. We'll keep you updated on when Shauna is fighting. Very, very, very excited to see her UFC debut. Great to have some Irish talent come forth again into the UFC, and hopefully Shauna's entry into the UFC will be the first of a lot of Irish talent that we'll see in coming years as well. Harry, we are going to take a look now at the rest of the card really, really quickly. Coming up in 1 hour, a couple of fights. Basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call out these fights and you're going to share your quick thoughts on how you see these fights going or how you think of the fight as well. And the first one we'll step on is Chris Duncan versus Yanil Ashmouche in the lightweight division. Your thoughts, please.
Well, Chris Duncan's coming in now off that very, very close fight with Omar Morales. Great fight, great back and forth. I've not had a chance to go and have a look at Ashmouche, but an undefeated prospect absolutely decimated Sam Patterson in his UFC debut. And so
sensational knockout. Unfortunately, Sam Patterson had to be on the end of that, and we wish him well after that knockout. But my goodness, that was frightening knockout in his UFC debut.
Absolutely. So we know that he carries power. We know that he can do the hitting. Chris Duncan is somebody that's happy to put himself in those sorts of situations to land his own shots. So I'm sure, without a shadow of a doubt, that will be a fun one.
Absolutely. Next on tap, Danny Roberts versus Johnny Parsons in the 170-pound division. And by all means, if any of these fights are worthy of the arm toss, throw it over the head if we want to. But Danny Roberts he's an old school veteran of UK mixed martial arts, and it's great to see him in kind of doing the thing in the UFC at this stage of his career, still competitive inside the octagon.
Yeah, I think Danny Roberts is being used as the Johnny Parsons fight is not a great fighter, right? This is an evenly matched fight. If Johnny Parsons goes in and wins, I think it tells us where Danny Roberts is. If Danny Roberts goes in and wins, I think it tells us where Johnny Parsons is. Like, I know that's kind of criticizing myself, contradicting myself, but that's really where this fight is. Pretty evenly matched fight. Fair play for Danny Roberts still doing the thing, still flying the flag for UK MMA after all these years. And look, I have no problem with him being at this level for as long as he wants to continue.
Absolutely. Ketlen Vieira versus Penny Kanzad, 135-pound division. A chance here for Ketlen Vieira, in my opinion, to kind of get back in and get a win over someone like Penny Kanzad. I think if this fight plays out on the feet, it's going to be a long, long night for Penny Kanzad coming in here. Obviously, Vieira coming off that loss against Raquel Pennington by split decision. She'll be looking to kind of come in there and make a statement against Kanzad, won't she, Harry?
Ketlen Vieira has to finish this fight.
Yeah.
She has to finish this fight. That's it. She has to.
100%. Brian Barberena at 185 pounds taking on Mahmoud Muradov. Barberena moving up in weight here. He was a natural 170 moving up here again, just trying to test the waters at 185 coming in against Mahmoud Muradov. What's your thoughts on this? Brian Barberena always in fun fights here. I feel obviously Muradov coming off that loss against Kyle Baralio in his last fight at middleweight. Your thoughts on this fight?
I don't like the step up in weight. Now I know that I usually am somebody that
very surprised to hear that.
Takes away from the weight cutting, but this is a 15-pound increase from a guy that wasn't the most shredded fighter in the world at 170 and is a guy that isn't of necessarily the physical stature to go up and compete with the bigger boys, right? Like those 185 boys are big men, big men, and Barberena at 6 foot flat and, carrying a little bit of timber here and there, even when he's fighting, that to me doesn't feel like the smartest decision. I will always, without a doubt, congratulate people for not cutting weight. And I think Moradav is a guy that Brian Barberena on his day can certainly get inside and box up and take down and rough up. But Moradav is a big man in his own right. We saw what he did to Andrew Sanchez. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think maybe if Barberena gets through this one, fair play to him. But I don't see this being a long, drawn-out, illustrious, fruitful middleweight run.
Absolutely. Opening up the card are flyweights. Jafel Filho is coming in after trying to take the leg of Muhammad Mohayev in his last fight home with him against UFC debutant from Spain, Daniel Barrez. That will kick us off in the card. Really, really good card. Look, we could have spent a lot longer on that. Obviously, we're tight for time right now. We need to get this man to bed. It's all hours of the morning over in London at this stage, but a fantastic card. We're going to break it down on the live stream as well. Follow Harry Powell at BJJ_Harry Powell at O'Neill MMA is where you'll find me on social media. Like I said, come on to the Severe YouTube channel on Saturday. We'll be there doing the live watch. We'll be there to break down all these fights and talk about them in more detail. And until then, take care, look after yourselves, and we'll see you the next time.